Hello, welcome. We are glad that you are joining us today for our video. We are going to have you watch a short video that talks about making mistakes and people's reaction to making mistakes. We will focus on error sensitivity in children. We will also talk about how parents can help children cope with making mistakes. You may be wondering, what is error sensitivity? When we say someone is high in error sensitivity, we are referring to overreacting in a negative way to one's own mistakes. Of course, we all make mistakes sometimes. However, we all have different reactions to making mistakes. For example, when you notice a mistake you made, do you feel very upset? When you make a mistake, do you always want to fix it? Are you afraid of making mistakes in front of other people? Do you like to do things perfectly? When you make a mistake, do you feel anxious? When you make mistakes, do you start sweating or blushing? Please take a minute to write down the ways that you usually respond to making mistakes. You can do this in the handout under the first question on page 3. Go ahead and stop the video now while you write down your answers. If you said, you feel upset when you make mistakes, you always want to fix mistakes, you don't like making mistakes in front of other people, you like to do things perfectly, or you feel anxious or sweaty when you make mistakes, you may be high in error sensitivity. If you said that you were high in error sensitivity, you are definitely not alone. Research suggests that people today are more than twice as stressed as people were even 30 years ago. Today, especially in the United States, we tend to be high in error sensitivity and high in perfectionism. We also tend to be very overwhelmed. You may be wondering, don't I have to pay attention to my mistakes to make sure I'm doing a good job? You're definitely right about that. If you aren't paying attention at all, or you just don't care about your performance, you might be like this guy and you might not get anything done correctly. However, if you overreact to your own mistakes, you may be like this woman. She is too stressed to do anything well, and she certainly isn't enjoying the successes she may have. What we want to do is aim for something in the middle. We want to notice our mistakes so that we can do something differently next time. We want to learn from our mistakes, but not beat ourselves up for them. Adults aren't the only ones who can be high in error sensitivity. Research suggests that children are increasingly concerned with their own performance. Do you think that your child is high in error sensitivity? Does your child get very upset when they make a mistake? Does your child want to do things perfectly? Is your child so afraid of making mistakes that they hold back from challenges? Does your child blame others for their errors? Does your child tend to be self-critical? Does your child avoid doing things they may fail at? If so, your child may be high in error sensitivity. If you or your child is high in error sensitivity, there are some important things to consider. We all need to recognize mistakes so that we do not keep repeating them, but being overreactive to one's own mistakes in a negative way has some downsides. For example, increased error sensitivity is actually related to worse performance on many tasks. Increased error sensitivity or perfectionism is also related to anxiety, depression, decreased enjoyment of tasks, increased fatigue, trouble sleeping, headaches, stress, anger, and low self-esteem. Being too reactive to making mistakes or being too perfectionistic is ultimately self-defeating. Mistakes are a chance to learn. By avoiding mistakes at all costs, we are actually holding ourselves back from learning. How does your child typically respond to making mistakes? Does your child cry when they make mistakes? Do they get frustrated? Do they say things like, "I'm dumb"? Do they get anxious? Do they say things like, "I should have known better"? If so, your child may be overreacting to mistakes. Please take a minute to write down the ways your child reacts to making mistakes in the handout. This can be found under question number 2 on page 3. Feel free to pause the video while you do this. You may be wondering, where did my child's error sensitivity or perfectionism come from? There are 2 main pathways. The first pathway is genetic or heritability. The second pathway is learning from the environment. If you or your child's other parent tend to be high in error sensitivity or perfectionism, your child will inherit this tendency as well. We can measure the response to making mistakes that happens in your brain using techniques like EEG and fMRI. There is a very distinct signal created by your brain right after you make a mistake. This signal comes from a part of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex, right here. We can measure this signal in adults and children. We know from many studies now that having too much error reactivity in the brain puts people at risk for having anxiety. We now know that this type of brain activity, error-related brain activity, is heritable. So, if your brain tends to overreact to errors, so will your child's. In addition to inheriting error sensitivity, children also learn how to react to mistakes by observing their parents react to mistakes. For example, if you make a mistake like spilling milk and react very negatively, your child learns that mistakes are a big problem and that it is appropriate to react very negatively to mistakes. In this way, you are constantly modeling how to react to mistakes for your child. For example, if you make a mistake in front of your child and say something like, "Now I learned something," or "It's okay, everybody makes mistakes," you have modeled that mistakes are a chance to learn and that we don't have to react overly negatively to mistakes. Our research suggests that how parents react to mistakes in front of their children has a large impact on their children's error sensitivity. How do you typically react to mistakes in front of your child? Please take a minute to write down how you usually model error reactivity for your child in the handout. This can be found under question number 3 on page 3. Feel free to pause the video while you do this. If you tend to have a large brain response to errors, your child will inherit this tendency through genes. Additionally, you will also tend to model this tendency for your child. In this way, if you are high in error sensitivity and you model this for your child is getting a double whammy dose of high error sensitivity. Because of the double whammy effect, it is particularly important to think about what you are modeling for your child. Often, your natural tendency will be to model behavior that is the same as the genetic disposition your child already has. This is good news if you are modeling adaptive coping behavior. This is something to pay attention to, especially if you think you may be modeling overreactivity to mistakes. To help your child form healthy error sensitivity, we recommend staying calm when you make mistakes. We also recommend saying things like, "Everybody makes mistakes sometimes. It's okay to make mistakes. Mistakes are a chance to learn. Making mistakes means that you are challenging yourself. It's okay not to be perfect. Mistakes can be funny. I can laugh at my mistakes. And making mistakes is human." We also recommend emphasizing effort more than outcomes. Letting your child make their own mistakes. Don't take over for your child. Modeling self-acceptance. Losing gracefully. Balancing work and play. And letting your child's achievement be their own. Don't measure yourself by your child's accomplishments or mistakes. Please take a minute or two to write down what strategies you would like to use more often to model helpful coping to your own mistakes for your child. You can use strategies that we use in the video, or you can use your own. Feel free to pause the video while you do this. Along with your reaction to your own mistakes, your reaction to your child's mistakes is also important. When your child makes a mistake, how do you typically respond? Do you get upset, fix the mistake immediately, scold your child, criticize your child, tell your child it's okay to make mistakes, remain calm and let your child realize they made a mistake, let your child know that they can learn from mistakes? Please take a minute or two to write down how you usually respond when your child makes a mistake. This can be found under question number 5 on the handout. Feel free to pause the video while you do this. We now know from research that children tend to internalize their parents' reactions to their mistakes. Your child is paying close attention to you. Your reactions to their mistakes matter. To help your child cope with making mistakes, we recommend that when your child makes a mistake, you remain calm and you say something like the following. Everybody makes mistakes sometimes. It's okay to make mistakes. Mistakes are a chance to learn. Making mistakes means that you are challenging yourself. It's okay not to be perfect. Mistakes can be funny. You can laugh at your mistakes. Making mistakes is human. To help your child, we recommend reinforcing realistic expectations and standards, showing your child that your love for them does not depend on them being perfect, helping them to see failure as an opportunity for growth and not something to fear or avoid, emphasizing the effort they put in, saying things like, "You tried really hard and I'm proud of you," letting them know that imperfection can be celebrated because it means we are human. Please take a minute or two to write down in your handout under number 6, what strategies would you like to use more often to react to your child's mistakes? Feel free to pause the video while you do this. To sum it all up, people react differently to making mistakes. High error sensitivity is overreacting in a negative way to one's own mistakes. We know that high error sensitivity is related to risk for anxiety, stress, anger, and low self-esteem. We can measure error sensitivity in the brain. It is also heritable. Children are also very impacted by their parents' response to mistakes. Helpful coping strategies for error sensitivity include emphasizing that everybody makes mistakes, emphasizing that mistakes are a chance to learn, and emphasizing effort instead of achievement. Thank you for listening to our presentation.